Welcome back, fifth graders. Mr. James here with your reading lesson for day 4. This will be lesson 15, and we are going to be in a new text that is found in your text collection, which is why we kept sending them back to those of you who were trying to return them to us. We had a plan all along. When we want you to return something, we will put on that slip on the back, please return, and it will have the texts that we would like you to return. So, our enduring understanding is readers understand that texts have multiple themes and main ideas. And our essential question is, how do readers determine multiple themes and main ideas in texts? And your objective for today is to determine the main idea and key details. So, from this section of the text, if you were to summarize it in a short sentence, what would you say the main ideas was, the main thing that we learned, and then what were some facts that would support that? So we're going to read pages 101 through 112 in the text collection. And after that, we will get a chance to answer some questions about text, do our vocabulary, and our right and response to reading. Make sure you have your text collection in front of you and you are open to new beginnings, Jamestown and the Virginia colony.
April 26th, we first saw the coast of Virginia. We entered Chesapeake Bay and landed, discovering fair meadows and goodly tall trees, with such fresh waters running through the woods. I was stunned at the sight. George Percy, Jamestown colonist.
So that's a little
These houses in the Colonial National Historical Park at Jamestown have been made to look like the original ones.
So this would be similar, this picture, to if you go to Fort Walla Walla and they have those rebuilt Fort Walla Walla type buildings.
Introduction. Why would people leave their homes and families to risk an ocean journey of more than 3,000 miles? Why would they give up the comforts of a settled life for the unknown dangers of a new land? England in the late 1500s was not a pleasant place for most people. Many people were out of work. Many had lost their homes. Some saw a chance for a better life in America. They hoped to ship furs, fish, and timber back to England to make their fortune. Others believed that they would find gold and silver in America. Still others wanted to farm. People like these were among the first small groups of English settlers who sailed to the new land. They arrived in what is now the state of Virginia. The Virginia colony became the first permanent English settlement in America. In the earliest years of the Virginia colony, the Virginians made some decisions that would shape the history of America. The earliest English settlers were taking the first step on the road to building the modern United States. Many brave people followed them. This is their story. Starting Jamestown. Virginia's story begins with a disaster. In 1587, English colonists settled on an island they called Roanoke. The island is off the coast of present-day North Carolina. The Roanoke colony did not last. When leaders returned with supplies from England in 1590, everyone had disappeared. The fate of the lost colony, as it was called, is still a mystery. This disaster stopped the English from returning to Virginia for a short time. After a while, the idea of riches won out over any fear of what might happen. In 1606, a group of London businessmen decided they could get rich in North America. They formed a company called the Virginia Company. They asked King James I of England for a charter or a permit to start a colony in Virginia. The charter stated the rights, duties, and goals of the company. The king thought a colony would benefit England. He granted the charter. 3 ships left London for Virginia in December 1606. The ships carried about 100 colonists and all the things they would need. Who were these brave people? They were all men. Some of them were farmers. Others were servants. A few were skilled craftsmen. Many of them were gentlemen. At that time in England, gentlemen did not do physical labor. These men did not expect to do any work in the Virginia colony either. English gentlemen were not prepared for the work of building a colony. Arrival in Virginia. The English had learned something from earlier failures, but they hadn't learned enough. They sent people to the new land who had no skills or desire to work. They were not planning to clear forests and plant crops. They believed their only work would be bending over to pick up all the gold and silver on the ground. They were going to the Virginia colony to strike it rich. Crossing the Atlantic had left most of the travelers seasick and weak. They wondered if they had made the right choice. Then, on April 26, 1607, they first saw the coast of Virginia. The beauty of the land stunned them. Flowers were in bloom. Dense forests with wild game covered the land. The settlers saw Virginia as a land of opportunity. For the next few weeks, the colonists explored the coast. They sailed up a river they named the James. On May 14th, they chose a place for their settlement. They called it Jamestown. Both the river and the town were named in honor of England's king, James I. These are copies of two of the three Jamestown ships, the Susan Constant, left, and the Godspeed, right. The colonists and the Native Americans. The Native Americans who lived in the area were the Powhatan. They were a tall, dignified people. They farmed, fished, and hunted. They had a powerful chief, also called Powhatan. He led some 9,000 people. The Powhatan men were warriors. They thought of war as a kind of deadly sport. Men went to war to show their courage. Raids on enemy villages were common. So, the settlers' first task was to build a log fort. Relations between the Indians and the settlers were always uneasy. To the Powhatan, the colonists were invaders. The English thought they were bringing civilization to the Indians. They believed that the English way of life was the best way. Yet the settlers needed Powhatan help. They traded with the Indians for food. The Powhatan were glad to trade for metal tools and guns. They didn't know how to make such things, but they had little food to trade. They grew only enough food to last into early spring. The settlers' demands put the tribe at risk. If they gave the settlers too much food, they themselves could starve. The differences between the Indians and colonists would cause trouble between the two groups. Voices from America. In our great need, the Indians brought us corn when we rather expected they would destroy us. John Smith, leader of the Virginia colony. The first months. Soon problems developed. The place the colonists chose for their settlement proved to be a mistake. They had chosen land that stuck out into the river. They thought that this made good sense. The deep water let the colonists tie their ships up close to land. But the land was marshy, the soil was poor. Salt water backed up from the ocean and got into the drinking water. Mosquitoes thrived in the marshy land. The mosquitoes spread malaria. The disease killed many settlers. Many colonists became ill from drinking the bad water. The few crops the men had planted were not yet ripe. They were low on supplies. The settlers grew weak from lack of food. They were often unable to hunt or fish because of the danger of attack by the Native Americans. Life in Jamestown did not get off to a good start. These early months were hard. Settlers gathering logs to build a fence around the fort. A leader saves the colony. All through that first summer, people died. By September, more than half the settlers were dead. The leaders argued among themselves. No one could decide what to do. Would Jamestown suffer the same fate as the lost colony? The settlers needed a leader, or they would all die. At last, one man took charge. His name was Captain John Smith. Smith was 27 years old when he arrived in Jamestown. As a soldier, he already had lived through enough adventures for a man twice his age. He knew how to survive in the wilderness. He knew that the settlers had to work and farm, not search for gold. Smith gave orders for each man to work on building the fort and gathering food. When the gentlemen reminded Smith of their rank, Smith had a simple answer. He who will not work will not eat. The gentlemen went to work. Smith helped the settlers survive. Captain John Smith, Powhatan Village. John Smith and Pocahontas. In December 1607, Smith almost died when the Indians captured him. They took him to the chief. Smith later wrote a book about his experiences. When the warriors picked up their clubs and rocks, he was certain he was about to die. According to Smith, just before they came at him, Pocahontas, Powhatan's 13-year-old daughter, rushed out. She laid her head across Smith's body. In Smith's account, the chief was moved by his daughter's actions. Instead of killing him, they adopted Smith into the tribe. He returned to Jamestown with not only his life, he had also won the friendship of the chief. Pocahontas did more than save John Smith's life. Over the next few years, she helped save the colony. She brought food to the colonists. She also helped the newcomers trade for goods with her people. She warned the settlers about raids the Powhatan planned against them. They were able to prepare themselves for battle because of her early warnings. Voices from America. Princess Pocahontas risked the beating out of her own brains to save mine. Not only that, but she so won over her father that I was safely conducted to Jamestown. John Smith. Pocahontas pleading with her father to save John Smith's life. A deadly time. The Powhatan released Smith in January 1608. When he returned to Jamestown, he found a group of cold and hungry settlers. Smith was a great leader, but the colony still faced many challenges. Remarkably, on the same day he returned, a ship from England sailed up the river. It carried about 100 new settlers, along with food and supplies. The colony's bad luck continued, however. A few days later, a fire broke out in the village, destroying most of it. While the settlers rebuilt their village, Smith went back to the Powhatan to trade for food. The Native Americans and the settlers also exchanged hostages as a way of keeping the peace. Still, the weakened settlers continued to die. By spring, only 38 were left. Most had died of starvation or illness. Meet Tom Savage. Tom Savage was a 13-year-old orphan in England. In 1608, he talked his way onto Captain Newport's ship that was sailing for Jamestown. The captain liked the boy. He took him on as an indentured servant. That meant Tom would have to work for Newport for 7 years to pay for his passage to America. In Jamestown, Tom expected to work as a field hand for Newport. Then, Captain Newport and John Smith discovered that Native American tribes sometimes traded children. So the colonists exchanged Tom for an Indian boy named Nomantak. Tom lived with the Powhatan for 3 years. He learned their language and their customs. Tom became a spy for the colonists. He told them when the Powhatan planned attacks. As a reward, Newport freed Tom from his indenture. Soon after new settlers arrived, a fire burned houses inside the walls of the fort. Trouble ahead. In the fall of 1608, another ship arrived with more settlers, including the first 2 women. Bad luck continued. Rats had eaten most of the ship's supplies for the settlers. Smith organized fishing and hunting parties. He made sure everyone worked hard to get food. As a result, very few settlers died that winter. In 1609, John Smith was badly hurt. By accident, his bag carrying his gunpowder exploded. He sailed back to England to get treatment for his injuries. Before leaving Jamestown, Smith looked over the storehouses. He was pleased to see that the colony had enough food to get through the winter. The future of Jamestown looked brighter. There were now about 500 colonists. Among the new colonists was a woman named Anne Burras. She married settler John Layden. It was the first wedding in Jamestown. Smith planned to return to Jamestown. Although he returned to America, he never made it back to Jamestown. However, he wrote a book that told of life there. His book inspired many people to come to North America. Smith thought he had left a colony that would have no trouble surviving. More women arrived in Jamestown after 1609. The starving time. When John Smith left Jamestown, there were 500 settlers. By the spring of 1610, only 60 were still alive. What could have happened in such a short time? How did the settlers die? The Powhatan had become more and more angry with the settlers for taking their land. With Smith gone, they decided to try to wipe out the colony. They would starve the colonists. They killed off the wild game around Jamestown that the colonists hunted for meat. Then they surrounded the village. The colonists could not leave to hunt or fish. Quickly they went through their storehouse of food. Then they ate their cattle and goats. Next, they ate their dogs, and finally, rats and mice. The colonists starved and died through that long, terrible winter. By spring, the few who were left were ready to leave the colony. Jamestown seemed to be finished at last. The colonists called the winter of 1609 to 1610 the starving time. Colonists walking to church in the snow.
Pretty bleak time for the citizens of Jamestown at this point. We'll have to see if they can recover from this as we read next time.